everybody. Welcome back to another installment of the Can We Please Talk podcast. As always, I'm Mike Leon.
And I'm Nick Saveri.
He's a bad man, and obviously we love him around here because it's been Conor McGregor week. Let's welcome in the man who says he's the face of the UFC, the notorious Conor McGregor, hanging out with us here on APG.
I like your house analogy right there. I'll use that because I think he has the foundation. He's a 7-footer. You can't teach 7 foot, like you said.
That voice you just heard is former ESPN anchor and current Fox Sports host Mike Hill. He's going to be joining us tonight as our special guest, talking about the world of sports broadcasting, but also, as those of you watching on video can see behind me, got a copy of his book. Mike recently wrote a memoir called Open Mic, and it's really a fascinating tale because a lot of people don't know this about Mike Hill and how he got start into broadcasting, but previously, he served in the Air Force Academy. He was deployed overseas. He worked in the government for the NSA for years, getting classified reports to the CIA and FBI and the other intelligence agencies in DC. So he's got such an interesting story just from that alone. But then he transitioned into sports broadcasting, working at small stations like Nashville and Dallas. And he talks a lot about this in the book, and ultimately landing at ESPN, which wasn't a dream job for him. And then he talks a lot about some of the different things that anchors go through, working at ESPN. And myself, having worked at ESPN as a production assistant, I know some of the trials and tribulations anchors go through and people that work there go through on and off air. So it was really fascinating read. And now he's transitioning another part of his life. Now he's on reality television, married to Cynthia Bailey from the Real Housewives of Atlanta. So just so much to unpack with Mike Hill. I'm excited to get started and talk to him tonight.
Like so many of our other guests, Mike brings just an unbelievable background in terms of his experience. For Mike, co-host Mike and I, both of us come from a background. Mike, obviously, you've been at ESPN. For me, I had a brief broadcasting career in local radio, and that opportunity to hear from someone who's really just taken their time in the field and just taken it to extreme heights. But on the same side, Mike's been over at Fox Sports as well. So just that difference in those working in those two different companies, battling for ratings and such.
No, it's true. And there's always that big theory that these anchors, they get paid so handsomely on air, that they're doing so well. Hey, you're on TV, and he talks a lot about that in the book. He was struggling financially for his first few years. The way contracts are negotiated with anchors, he signed a 3-year deal and then signed another 3-year extension. So it's like, it's almost like people have this one sense of what these people are like, or at least lifestyle-wise, monetarily, that they're doing well. And it's really not like that for at least some of the anchors that are on the ESPN Newses of the world, the secondary and tertiary channels that these big networks have. And then just some of the personal stuff that he touched on. He witnessed domestic violence in his own house upbringing. There's just a lot to unpack from the book. It's a really good read, and it's in his voice. It's out there, available now wherever books are sold. And we're going to be talking to Mike in a little bit. All right, joining us now, he's a Fox Sports host, college basketball pregame. He recently wrote a book, for those of you watching on YouTube can see over my shoulder. It's called Open Mic. It's a memoir about his life, a bunch of interesting stories in that book. Mike served in the Air Force Academy, worked for the NSA, he's worked at ESPN, Fox, and that is Mike Hill. Mike Leon, Nick Saveri, thanks for jumping on with us.
Mike and Nick, how you doing, man? Thanks for having me. Appreciate it, brothers.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we get into everything, Mike, we follow you on Twitter. You've been very vocal in the last couple of days. I wanted to get your take on this because it's so serious and so fresh in everyone's mind, the events that happened on January 6th in our nation's capital. Just somebody who worked, for the Air Force, for the NSA. Like, what's your take on what happened on January 6th?
Obviously, it was one of the darkest days in this country's history, and that says a lot for this country, which has had a lot of dark days, especially when it's come to the disenfranchised. I never thought I'd see something like that happen, especially spearheaded by the leader of this country to basically sick his supporters on not only democracy, but also on the people who are in office to serve and help us as a nation. this man has done nothing but divide over the last 4 years. I'm talking about Trump, obviously. I can't even call him President Trump. And yes, I did serve in the military, and I know I'm supposed to respect the office of the presidency, but I can't respect him because this man has done nothing but try and tear this nation apart. I fought to make this country the United States of America, and it's been anything but with him. So what I saw there was a bunch of ignorant people who are brainwashed by a man and really feels like they can believe anything he says, and he knows that they'll believe anything he says. And he basically started an insurrection, almost a coup, to try and take over this country, to try and stop the democracy that we built for so many years in this country. And I'm just happy that finally, people are taking steps, and there's more and more people are starting to come to the realization of who he is. Not enough Republicans still, because only 10 voted to impeach him still in the House, and that's still not enough. And people are still making excuses for him. But hopefully, we'll make more and more progress and make this country the country we wanted it to be.
Mike, first and foremost, thank you for your service, and also thanks for coming on our show. In talking about the NSA, just educating our audience. One thing we like to do is just bring people on from different backgrounds and telling their story. Just describe the NSA a little bit, and also going forward in the new administration, what are your hopes for the organization as it relates to being more mindful of domestic terrorism, which is what we saw last Wednesday?
Yeah, well, the NSA stands for the National Security Agency. I was a member of the National Security Agency the last 3 years of while I was in the military, when I was in the Air Force. And they provide intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, for the other entities out there, for the Pentagon and whatnot, work in conjunction with them. It's almost like a branch of the FBI, like the CIA or whatever. Then you have the NSA, and you have people that work there. But yeah, they usually work on a lot of things that happen when it comes to overseas and things like that. When I was there, it was, and this was before 9/11. A lot of the things we didn't do domestic, intelligence. It was more so about the things to kind of give support to our troops overseas. But I'm pretty sure that's changed a lot now. Of course, I haven't been in the building since 1995, and that was long before 9/11. So I know a lot of things have changed over the years, but hopefully we'll do a better job of stamping out the terrorism that's happening in this country. And I think we need to brand it what it is, because it is terrorism. And there have been terrorists in this country for many, many years. And I'm talking about the Ku Klux Klan and white supremacists and things like that. That is terrorism. Bombing churches, that is terrorism. Trying to stop people from voting and whatnot, that's terrorism. Those are terroristic acts, and we need to call it what it is. So hopefully we can do a better job to kind of weed out those type of people in our society to make this country a better place to live in.
Mike, one of the things I love about reading about the book is you take us through your personal life, some of the things you witnessed in your life. And I guess, a lot of people, they see you on TV, they think, here's this sports broadcaster. He probably always wanted to be a sports broadcaster. Why don't you tell the people a little bit about your upbringing? Because you talk about you wanted to get into acting in the book. You never really thought you would get into sports broadcasting. Give our audience a little bit about your upbringing and how you really got into sports broadcasting.
Well, from that side of things, I always liked playing sports. I wasn't great at sports, but I enjoyed playing. I was passionate about it. But I realized in an early age that I wasn't going to go pro. Even though I grew up across the street, when I was born in New York, I was, raised across the street from Yankee Stadium. My grandmother lived right across the street from Yankee Stadium. And I always had dreams of playing in Yankee Stadium. I said I was going to work in Yankee Stadium, and I actually ended up working in Yankee Stadium when I started working in New York. But I got into sports because I did want to be an actor. But at the time I realized like being an actor wasn't something that was going to be secure for me. So how could I get in front of the camera, but also have something that's a little bit more stability, that involves a little bit more stability? And so I chose broadcasting because of my passion for sports. I was going to start off in news, but then I realized that I didn't want to be the person sticking a microphone in somebody's face after they just lost a child or their house burned down or some kind of catastrophe happened. I wanted to spread joy and entertainment in the best way I knew how. And that was the love of sports, because regardless of what happens in sports in a game, more than likely, there's going to be an outcome where somebody's going to be really ecstatic and somebody's going to be sad. But even the people who are sad, it's not the end of the world, because your team lost. I mean, Ohio State lost the national championship. It's not the end of the world. They got to the national championship. Sure, there's a little depression that comes in, small depression, but at the end of the day, you're going to be able to get over that. So that's the reason I got into sports. But then I realized over a period of time that, my voice and my platform is a little bit bigger, and I need to speak out on things such as what we talked about in the beginning to make my voice be heard and use that platform in that regards.
And thinking about sports, one thing the three of us have in common is we've all been on some form or another, either behind a microphone or behind a camera, or in some cases, both. What is it that people on the outside get wrong about people who are in sports media in terms of broadcasting and the feel? Like, what are the perceptions? What's a common misconception you get, like when you're among your circle of friends?
Man, I'm gonna keep it real with y'all. I'm just gonna be real.
That's what we do on the show.
I'm really formal, so I'm gonna get real relaxed on y'all. I think the biggest misconception that we have is that people think this stuff is easy, man. This ain't easy. I mean, like I'm a professional and I've been doing it for a while. Don't get me wrong. I think one of the biggest compliments is you can tell me that I make it look easy, but it's not easy. People say, oh, all you got to do is read a teleprompter. That's actually kind of hard to do, to read a teleprompter without sounding like you're actually reading it and sounding robotic or whatnot, to be conversational. And I don't even, and 90% of the time in my job now, I don't even read a teleprompter. But there's a lot of work that goes into it. I think a lot of people from the outside looking in think that because you go to the barbershop and you can debate somebody, that you can do what I do. And that is not the case. Just because you got an opinion on Kyrie Irving and whether he wants to play basketball or not, and whether James Harden's right to demand a trade and how he's going to do with the Brooklyn Nets now, and are they going to win a championship? Okay, that's your opinion. But there's so much more that goes into it. So much preparation, the things that people don't see. I kind of look at it as like an athlete, even though we cover athletes. You'll see the 3 hours of a game in the NFL game. You don't see the hours and days of preparation leading up to that game to get to that point so that they can execute that game plan. And the hours of game planning is the most important part of my job because I have to be prepared when I come on the air. So that's the big misperception, that we just get on the air and we just give our opinions or just read a teleprompter. There's so much more that's involved in that.
We're talking about athletes now. So flipping that around, like you've been around athletes professionally for a while now. Same question flipped around. What are the fans like us? What are we not getting right about athletes? And actually, you just mentioned Kyrie. If you don't mind, just sort of expanding that a little bit in terms of not so much what's going on with him, because that's a personal matter, but what are we all getting wrong about the way we interpret athletes and what goes on for them as human beings and as professionals?
But Kyrie's a prime example. Kyrie is human. I mean, we go through things in our lives as everyday citizens without being athletes or entertainers. They have the same emotions we have. I mean, they may be world-class athletes and be able to do things physically that limited amount of people in this world are able to do. But at the same time, their emotions and their thoughts and their hearts and their mindset pretty much the same. They might be a little bit stronger when it comes to recovering from certain things and trying to have a thicker skin or whatnot. But at the same time, they go through a litany of emotions just like we do. So we have to understand sometimes that, you know what, even though they can run, jump, and they can throw football and do all these crazy things, and they got these incredible skills, at the end of the day, they're still human. So I think we need to always bring it right back down to the base when it comes to judging them. Yeah. Obviously, you can have an opinion, and it's okay to have an opinion about anybody that you're watching. They put themselves in a situation, in the spotlight. People are going to judge them one way or the other. But at the end of the day, you got to put yourselves in their shoes too, and understand that they got family members that might be in their ear. They might have, personal issues at home. They got mental health issues that a lot of us deal with too that need to be addressed. So before I go overboard and criticize athletes, I always try to look at where they came from and what's going on in their lives and try and do a deeper dive before I make them that final decision or the final judgment on, what kind of person they are.
Mike, I was telling you this off air, but one of the things that really kind of spoke to me in the book, having worked at ESPN myself, was just some of the things that people go through off air. You talk about how you were struggling financially. People think these anchors they see on ESPN News and, we're rolling in it and you just weren't, right? And then you talk about how unhappy you were when FS1 launched and you thought you were going to be jumping over there. when you look back at your career, especially everyone kind of knows you from ESPN. You touch upon that in the book that people are like, "Yeah, I saw you on ESPN." You're like, "I haven't worked there in years." Um,
Right.
what do you look back fondly at certain things, or do you look back with? I know you mentioned it in the book, but give our audience a little bit of like, do you look back and say, "I'm glad I worked there. I have it on my resume," or is it more of I just hate some of the things that they do, and I'm glad that I am where I am now.
I think it's a little bit of both. I think in the beginning I was bitter, and I had to admit that. I can sit here and admit that I was bitter about the way it ended at ESPN, but also look back at my tenure, those 9 years that I was there, and say that if it wasn't for that tenure at ESPN, I wouldn't be in the position I am right now because it gave me a platform. So I'm very thankful for what ESPN gave me, the things that it allowed me to do, the exposure that it gave me, the name. I probably wouldn't even be on this show right now if it wasn't for ESPN, because who knows how it would have elevated me. I could have gone in a different direction or whatnot. But I was on the best.
Hold on, Mike.
Uh,
Mike, we would have had you on anyway, Mike. Well, I'm just saying, we would have had you
I
on
appreciate
anyway.
I appreciate it. Who knows? I got, but I don't know how it would have worked out, man,
Yeah.
because at one time I was going to go to the post office and go back into government, man. I was about to give up on my career. You reading the book in Dallas and what happened, but ESPN came along and I was on the national stage. And once again, I was on the worldwide leader of sports for 9 years. And I had I wasn't the superstar or one of their big stars, but I had a prominent role that people knew who I was because I was on some of the bigger shows. So I'm very thankful and grateful for that and the time and the people that I met there and the things that I learned. I'm telling you, man, it prepared me for everything that I'm doing right now, for the show I'm doing on Fox Soul, the Netflix show I did. It gave me a work ethic that is second to none. It prepared me for everything in this industry because they were top notch and they did everything in a top notch fashion. So I'm very thankful for that. The flip side of that, and I got to be honest with you, Mike, when it comes to this, is that I look back and like, how much better could it have been if I would have been given, I feel, in my opinion, at that time, if I would have been given a fair shot or an equal shot, or it wasn't so political, which I understand that in any business you're in, it's going to be a lot of politics that's going to be involved. But I looked at it as, man, this could have been this great utopia, and I only got a percentage of what it actually could have been. And for that, there's still a little regret. I shouldn't say regret. There's still a little, I wonder what would have happened, or I wish it would have. But at the end of the day, God doesn't make mistakes, and I'm where I'm supposed to be when I'm supposed to be right now.
Mike, let me just follow up on that real quick before Nick jumps in,
Hmm.
because you know I talk about it now with younger people, and they're like, "Oh, you worked at ESPN. I would love to work there." When
Hmm.
people asking you that, what kind of advice are you giving them? Because you know the belly of the beast, especially at what people see as the highest level, right? Being on air. But they
Hmm.
don't see what the PAs, the APs, the CPs, production assistant, associate producer, coordinated producer, for those who don't know,
Hmm.
they don't see what those people go through, right? The long hour. You talk about it, long hours. I remember shifts where I'm working Sunday night baseball till 2:30 and I'm back at 7 a.m. So
Hmm.
what do you recommend for people that really want to make it and stay in this field? Because you talk about a lot about it in the book. Like, look, I wanted to do this, so I knew this came with it.
Be prepared to work and be willing to have these sacrifices, and don't look at it for the money, because the money for the most cases is not going to be there. Like you mentioned, when I was at ESPN, for the most part, while I was at ESPN, for many of the years I was there, I was broke. I mean, seriously, I had a wife, I had kids, and I was struggling. I was making okay money. I guess I was making money compared to the rest of the world, but I had issues, had bills, had things that piled up. A lot of it my fault. Don't get me wrong, but at the same time, I wasn't able to get my head above water. But yeah, so you got to go out there and you got to be willing to work, especially if you want to go to ESPN, because I always looked at ESPN. Once again, this is not to down them or say anything negative about them, because they're doing what they're doing and they're doing it successfully well. But you work a lot of long hours for not a lot of pay and less appreciation. I'll put it to you that way. And Mike, you probably can attest to that. Now there are a few that are the chosen ones that I look at, and it's when I was there, now things could have changed. This 8 years ago, but there are a few that when you go through the right doors and you're in the right country club and you're with the right people who are in charge, you're going to be able to survive and thrive there. But at the same time, for the majority of the people that work there, it's going to be a lot of long hours and hard work that you're going to put in. And a lot of times you're not going to get a pat on your back, but you're going to get a kick in your ass when you don't perform well. You know what I'm saying? So it's hard. So be ready to not think it's all going to be a utopia or all roses and rainbows when you get there. If you go to ESPN or anywhere in this industry, because it's tough. It's a lot of hard work.
A couple places we've been spending in this conversation is, we talked about just the realities, politically, socially right now. Been talking about sports media for a few minutes. Bridging the gap for a second, obviously we just all heard the news about Dan Le Batard, where he's moving off to, we think a couple of years ago, that situation with Jamel Hill, Michael Smith, what happened to the six? Where's the balance you feel in terms of the realities of being as a human being and being a person in these times, and melding that conversation about sports, about entertainment, but with the realities of who we are as people? What does that balance look like? What should it be?
I think you'd be stupid, naive, or just not looking at reality if you can't mesh what's going on in the world with sports. I hate when people say stick to sports. I hate it. I can't stand it. That's like one of the. It gets still to this day boils my blood when somebody tells me to stick to sports, because like you mentioned, my background, man. I had a top secret clearance in this country. You know what I mean? I was in the military. I served this country for 6 years. I'm a father. I'm a taxpaying citizen. I got the right to speak on a lot of things in this country if I feel like it's not right. I'm still a citizen at the end of the day. My profession does not identify me who I am fully. You know what I'm saying? So I look at it that way. So if you're in this world of sports and you're doing this, if somehow, some way that what's happening in society can transcend into the world of sports, which it usually does, and we've seen it from Colin Kaepernick to, you mentioned Jamel and all those things, and just the athletes, period. Talking about long before Colin Kaepernick, Donald Sterling in a situation with the Clippers years ago. All those type of things, you have to kind of look and say, well, hey, this is part of the world. And yes, we want sports to be the form of entertainment that kind of takes our mind away and kind of distracts us. But at the end of the day, these athletes and the people who report on these athletes still have to go home and face the real world. So if you're telling me that the real world doesn't affect you professionally sometimes, then I want to meet you, because I need some of your blood, because you're not made like the rest of us, to be quite honest with you. So I think we have a responsibility to use that platform, not overdo it, not necessarily put too many of your opinions out there, but basically put what is happening on the table and then let everybody else decide.
Mike, one of the things that we need to talk about, this is going to be my wife's favorite part of the show, is because
Okay.
my wife turned me on to you being on the Housewives of Atlanta. I did not. She's like, oh, Cynthia's husband, Mike Hill. I'm like, Mike Hill? ESPN? And then we had to rewatch the seasons.
Oh, wow.
And then the audience is going to clown me for that. But anyway, Mike, I need to know now, you're used to having a camera in your face, but it's at a studio. You got to drive to the studio. Now in the most intimate moments in your life, there's a camera there, or at least when Bravo's recording. So what has that been like for you, that transition of now getting into reality TV and people are noticing you from that?
It's different. I was talking earlier today. When I first got involved, I had a friend of mine named Claudia Jordan, who actually used to be on the show years ago. And she said, be careful, because it's an animal that you've never experienced before. And I'm like, Claudia, what are you talking about, girl? I've been on ESPN, I've been Fox, I've been national TV for the last 16 years. I've been in business, so I got a tough skin, thick skin. I've been called everything in the business. It's crazy. This is a different animal, bro. I'm telling you. I ain't never had to deal with stuff like I've had to deal with over here with this reality show. These fans are on a different planet. They take this really seriously. They get invested in your lives, literally. So it took some getting used to for a short amount of time, because having cameras in your face, invading your life, your real life, and the things that you don't want to tell them, they're there, and then you might be put in compromising situations by a producer that tells somebody to say something, and then you got to answer a question, but there's a camera in your face and you got to react the right way. So it's different. It's taking some adjustments from the fan standpoint, but also being on the air and making sure that while I want to give the fans of Housewives a portion of my life to give them an idea of what my life is like, I can't give them everything. My wife does. She's under contract. I'm there in a supporting role or whatnot, but at the same time, I know there's a limit that I need to go to that I won't cross. So I had to learn where that line was, but I've learned. I know how to moonwalk out of situations now. I really do.
Thinking about recently, being now on a reality show, time in sports media, you've always had the camera or microphone not that far away from you.
Mm-hmm.
How do you recenter yourself when the camera's off? What do you do to sort of bring yourself back to who you are? And because I think something that we often forget is when you're on, that is a true statement. Like you are in front of people, millions of people and whatnot, and like you've got to be on what may feel like 24/7. So when all that gets turned off, Mike, what do you do to sort of bring yourself back to center?
I try and find things, the most brain-free program that I can find. That's why I used to watch like Housewives of Atlanta back in the day when I was at ESPN. I don't want to have to think sometimes, like I don't, and you know this in sports sometimes, like I couldn't even enjoy sports because I was watching it and I would have to analyze it and I would know that that's something that I had to talk about or whatever. So I was overanalyzing instead of just enjoying it. Now that I've kind of transitioned a little bit more out of sports into talk media and hosting or whatever, I can enjoy sports a little bit more. So what I do is I'll find something to kind of take my mind off of things and decompress, not think about the things that I have to do in life or whatever. So, but also what helps me is that when I'm on the air is basically, it's who I am. I'm not trying to pretend to be somebody else. I'm not trying to be buttoned up. I'm not trying to be perfect. I learned a long time ago that I'm not perfect and I don't sound perfect on the air. So I think people understand and they feel comfortable with flaws as long as it's not too uncomfortable where you're stuttering all the time or whatever. But at the same time, I think people like it when somebody sounds natural and just being themselves. So when I'm on the air, I write my scripts as if I'm talking to my best friend, like I'm talking to you guys right now, whatever. And when I'm off air, I sound the same way. So it's easy for me to transition from the on-air mic to off-air mic because it ain't really much of a difference.
Mike, we really appreciate you coming on tonight. I want to recommend the book for everybody out there. It's called Open Mic, available now where books are sold. You can catch Mike on Fox Sports, on Fox Soul, on Real Housewives of Atlanta. He going to be on Steve Harvey next. I didn't even know Dale Hughley's his cousin. I mean, there's just so much in that book. Mike, we really appreciate the time you gave us tonight, man. And all the best to you and Cynthia and your family.
Mike, Nick, this is great, man. Thank you for doing this. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on here. And anytime you need me, I'm there for you, my brothers.
All right, that was Fox Sports' Mike Hill. We're laughing, Nick and I, because Mike was just so open, so honest. Go get his book. It's called Open Mic. It's really a memoir on his life. There's just so much in the book. It's really written in his voice, Nick. And one of the things that you picked up on the interview, and he even said it, I'm gonna be real with y'all, and he does that a lot in the book, even though he shies away from certain topics, and it's very minimal, but he just talks about everything. I mean, guy worked, served in the Air Force Academy, right? Like he's working at the NSA. The trials and tribulations that people go through, especially on-air talent, because when you want to make it on air, you're always told, go work in a smaller market, right? And he did that. He was working in Nashville. He's working in Dallas. He's interviewing in Fresno, these small cities trying to get on. And his goal was never to work at ESPN. And, he worked at Fox Sports New York. He worked at ESPN for the 9 years, like he mentioned, transitioned to Fox Sports. And it's just such a fun journey that he takes you on. And now, like we talked about with him, being on reality television, it's a different animal, right? You mentioned it to him, Nick, the camera's always on you. What do you do to kind of recenter yourself? So I just thought it was a really fun interview. You got to learn a little bit more about him tonight, and hopefully our audience takes that away from it.
Yeah, like a lot of our guests, just the ability that Mike brings to just disrupt some misconceptions that we have about all these different fields that he's been a part of. And, through the book and this interview tonight, just taking us through his life story. It was awesome. He was super chill and just casually tells us, what went right and what could have been better, which was just thematically just an awesome way to get to really understand someone.
Yeah, it's true. And also the advice he gave to people out there that really want to come up. We've had a couple of different people that work in news journalism, but it's applies for sports journalism and broadcasting. There's gonna be long nights, long hours. Sabrina mentioned in that episode about it's not the most lucrative to start off. And people see these guys on air and they think they're rolling in it, and it's just not the case. So go get Mike's book. Like I said, Open Mike. It's available now wherever books are sold. You can catch him on Fox Sports hosting college basketball pregame. As always, for our show, hit subscribe, follow, however you're watching us across the different platforms. We're on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Google Podcast, Stitcher Podcast. Leave us a comment in the App Store. Be sure to subscribe, follow the show. Hit us up on Instagram and Twitter, TikTok, at Can We Please Talk Podcast. As always, I'm Mike Leon.
And I'm Nick Severi.
We'll catch everybody next time.